I've got to introduce you to two other concepts here inside our layers panel. We have blending modes and we also have opacity. And we've seen these guys come up a few times already, so I've got to show you how these guys work. Now, officially, the definition of a blending mode is a mathematical algorithm that's going to be used to calculate pixels, color pixels, between two layers. Now, that sounds incredibly complicated and very textbookish. Let me give you some visual examples to make it a heck of a lot easier. The way I think of these guys is an additional set of color effects that I can use inside my layers panel. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll start off with the statue layer. I have the statue layer still selected here from the previous lesson inside the layers panel. And notice at the top of the layers panel, we have this drop-down menu that reads normal. Now, you may have discovered this already on your own, but if I drop this guy down, we have a huge list of options: multiply and darken and lighter color and overlay and so on and so on. What the heck are these guys? These guys are the blending modes. And again, if you want the official textbook definition, each of these blending modes is a different mathematical calculation or mathematical algorithm to calculate the pixels inside statue and how they're going to blend with any layers that appear beneath it. So I'm going to grab my statue, and just to get us warmed up here, maybe what I'll do is I'll try multiply. I'll simply select multiply. And we see some kind of an effect applied to the pixels inside the selected layer. So for instance, again, this could be tough to see inside my screen, but I'm sure you can see it on yours. I can start to see the sky and the clouds behind the statue. Or what I could do is I could come back to multiply and I could try overlay instead. Change that. Now I have sort of this ghost effect happening here, which is kind of a cool effect actually. Or maybe I could try some others, maybe difference, for instance. You get kind of this negative film effect, right? Once again, there's no hard and fast rules for your blending modes. You're going to have to experiment and fiddle around and see what you come up with. You'll get used to which ones you like and which ones you don't like. But what's interesting to note here is, let's say, for instance, I go back to overlay. What I could do is I could combine a blending mode that I've selected here for my statue layer with the opacity as well. So in other words, what I could do is I could reduce down the opacity from the default, which is 100%, down to maybe 50%, or even further towards the left, maybe down to 30%, 35%. And what that does is that fades back the selected layer into any layers that appear beneath it. Maybe what I'll do here is I'll show you perhaps a better example of this. I'm going to grab my statue layer, and where it reads overlay, once again, the blending modes drop-down menu, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way back to normal. Now, normal is the default, right? So there's normal at 34%. But what I'll do is I'll drop down this opacity slider and I'll crank him all the way back up to 100%, and we're all the way back to where we started. In other words, blending modes and the opacity inside the layers panel, once again, are non-destructive. You're not permanently damaging your image. So let me give you perhaps some other examples here. I'm going to grab my white stripe layer. And maybe what I'll do is I'll adjust his opacity so that the white bar that we see here, the white rectangle, fades into the background a little bit, sort of ghosted into the background. So I have him selected inside the layers panel. Rather than dropping down the opacity slider there, instead what I'm going to do is simply click and drag on the word opacity, dragging to the left to fade this guy back, maybe something like this. So what we see here is the normal blending mode, which is the default blending mode, at about 50%, 49%. Or I could say, all right, show me what screen looks like at 49%. Or show me screen down at, let's say, 10%, something like that. Maybe that's the effect that I'm after, right? It's entirely up to you. Again, you just have to experiment and fiddle and see what you can come up with. Maybe hard light, and I'll crank this guy up a little bit more. Whatever it is that I'm after. Or perhaps it's something a little bit more subtle. Maybe I'm going to go overlay, something like that. But then what I'll do is I'll bring my opacity back up. So I'm dragging to the right now, maybe up to about 85%, maybe like that. Anyway, there you go, your blending modes and your opacity. Lots of fun here inside Photoshop. And don't forget, they're available for all of your layers. So I was showing you this on the statue layer. Don't forget we have the text layer, which again, it's a smart object, but we can still adjust this guy's blending mode and opacity if we are so inclined. So have some fun with these two guys, get a feel for it, and I'll catch up with you when you're ready to move on.